It's all right.
You started it.
I know. Those who know me probably agree that I have a keen sense of irony, which hasn't always served me well. Would you believe that? Here's an example. I suppose you can decide for yourself whether this is one of those times. In many traditions, this is the second Sunday of Advent. I mentioned last week that the candles on the Advent wreath, which symbolize the 4 Sundays in Advent for those who observe the season, are often taken as standing for hope, peace, joy, and love in that order. Today, then, would represent peace. But if you stop and think about it for a minute, it's ironic that we should be talking about peace on this particular morning. Mm-hmm. And Ollie is smiling, so I know he knows why. And yep.
That's right.
In 1941, 84 years ago, on this very day, a Sunday morning, much like this one, was a date which will live in infamy. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor dragged this country into World War II. You know, on second thought, maybe we do need to talk about peace today. There's a famous prophecy which appears with almost identical wording in Isaiah 2, verses 2 to 4, and Micah chapter 4, verses 1 to 3, which is worth quoting here. It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised above the hills, and all the nations shall flow to it. And many peoples shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations and shall decide for many peoples. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. Micah adds another verse to this pronouncement, which is Micah 4:4. But they shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. And that's another irony, because the hosts are the armies of heaven. Isaiah's version of the statement about beating swords into plowshares is inscribed on a granite wall in Ralph Bunche Park in New York City, across from the main building at the United Nations headquarters. And the UN was founded as a direct response to the carnage of war, particularly World War II, the bloodiest conflict in history. It cost the lives of an estimated 50 to 85 million people, the majority of them civilians. Now, it's been suggested, and reasonably in my opinion, that one reason that the prophecy appears in the writings of both Isaiah and Micah, who were contemporaries, by the way, is that it was originally part of the temple liturgy in Jerusalem. There are 2 bits of evidence for this. First, before talking about peace, the prophecy speaks of the exaltation of the mountain on which the temple is built, which then becomes the focal point for all the nations who come there to learn the ways of Israel's God. By the way, this seems to have been a major reason the Apostle Paul was so insistent that his converts to what we now know as Christianity not be forced to convert to Judaism first. The prophecy could only be fulfilled if the nations came to worship God as the nations, not if they became Jews first. The other reason to suspect that this prophecy originated in the temple liturgy is that Isaiah's prophetic call happened there. Isaiah chapter 6. So we know that he had access to the temple on a regular basis. He also had regular access to King Ahaz of Judah and his son King Hezekiah, whereas we don't have the same kind of evidence of elite access in Micah's case. Nor do we have any evidence that the two of them ever met. But since Micah would also have gone to the temple at least some of the time, it's easier to explain how both prophets were inspired by the same source than it is to explain how one of them came to quote from the other. But what are the ways of the Lord which the nations come to the Jerusalem temple to learn? They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. This is reinforced by the famous passage in Isaiah 9, 6-7, of which some of us might know only the first half, and that from the magnificent musical setting in Handel's Messiah, which I sang for 7 years, believe that or not. For unto us a child is born, and unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there shall be no end, upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. There's an interpretation going back to at least the Gospel of Luke in the late 1st century and the 2nd century Targum, or Aramaic paraphrase and commentary of Jonathan, that this prophecy describes the Messiah. The thing is, Christian translations usually misunderstand the nature of the child's name, which is probably what's called a theophoric name. That means that the name does one of three things. Either it invokes divine protection. For instance, Daniel means God is my judge. Or it's a statement of faith in or relationship with the divine. Elijah means the Lord is my God. Or it tells you something about God. Samuel means God heard. The name in Isaiah 9:6 is the last sort, and it should be translated more along these lines. A wonderful counselor is the mighty God. The everlasting Father is the Prince of Peace. The name was a description of who God is, not of who the child was, at least originally. It would be totally out of character for a Jewish prophet in the 8th century BCE, or any other time, to talk about a child as if he were God, especially when the child in the prophecy was probably, at least originally, the one who grew up to be King Hezekiah. It was only later that people realized that the prophecy might refer to the Messiah, the ultimate and ideal Davidic king. In case you haven't heard, I believe that prophecies can sometimes have what I call layers of fulfillment. Over the course of time, prophecies which were originally understood as referring to one thing can come to be recognized as also being applicable to new and different circumstances. In any case, both the child's name and the statement that of the increase of his government and of peace there shall be no end point back to this idea that God is the author of peace. The kingdom of God is, after all, the peaceable kingdom. According to the current edition of the OED, or Oxford English Dictionary, this phrase, in a theological context, first appears in an English Bible with the first edition of the King James Version in 1611, a mere 13 years before George Fox was born, as he tells us, in the month called July 1624. It's a chapter heading for the following passage. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide by what his ears hear. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall slay the wicked. Righteousness shall be the girdle of his waist, and faithfulness the girdle of his loins. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard lie down with the kid and the calf and the lion and the fatling together. And a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall feed, their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The infant shall play over the hole of the asp. The weaned child shall put his hand on the adder's den. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. For the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea, which is Isaiah 11, verses 1 to 9. The Geneva Bible of 1560, which was used by the Pilgrims and the Puritans, describes the same chapter with these headings. Verse 1, Christ born of the root of Jesse. Verse 2, his virtues and kingdom. Verse 6, the fruits of the gospel. Verse 10, the calling of the Gentiles. Very Calvinist points of view, all of them, which is understandable since the Geneva Bible was a Calvinist translation. But what's noticeable is that in the literary and historical citations of the OED, the first three citations after the use of the phrase the peaceable kingdom as a chapter heading in the King James Bible, the first two are from Quakers, including John Woolman. He's the second one. The third is from Francis Asbury, the Methodist preacher and bishop at the end of the 18th century. And then, of course, there are the series of paintings of the peaceable kingdom which were done in the early 19th century by the Quaker artist Edward Hicks, who is something like my third cousin 7 times removed or something. More recently, the Dutch-born author Jan de Hartog used the title for the first in his trilogy of historical novels about the Society of Friends. Perhaps the King James Bible was better suited than the Geneva for the more utopian theologies of Quakers, Methodists, and others. As I said, the kingdom of God is and will be the peaceable kingdom because God is the author and fount of peace. But notice that the peace is cosmic, not just political. Here, even animals which normally hunt and prey upon each other miraculously live together in peace. Wolves dwell with lambs, leopards, goats, kids, calves, and lions, and a little child shall lead them. Speaking of small children, they'll apparently have nothing to fear from venomous snakes, although we aren't told whether this means that the snakes are defanged, as it were, or gone altogether. And carnivorous beasts like lions have become vegetarians, vegans even. On a mythological level, what we have here is nothing short of a return to the paradisal conditions of the Garden of Eden. Several decades before the birth of Jesus, the Roman poet Virgil, who's probably best remembered as the author of the Aeneid, which is the Roman national epic, wrote these strikingly similar lines in his 4th eclogue. An eclogue is a pastoral poem, so it takes place out in the country. Now the last age of the prophecy begins. The great roll call of the centuries is born anew. Now the virgin returns. Only favor the child who's born, under whom any traces of our evils that remain will be canceled, and leave the earth free from perpetual fear. He will take on divine life, and rule a peaceful world with his Father's powers. And for you, boy, the uncultivated earth will pour out her first little gifts. The goats will come home by themselves, their udders swollen with milk, and the cattle will have no fear of fierce lions. Your cradle itself will pour out delightful flowers, and the snakes will die off, and deceitful poisonous herbs will wither. Spice plants will spring up everywhere. The plain will slowly turn golden with tender wheat, and the ripe clusters hang on the wild briar, and the tough oak drip with dew-wet honey. The soil will not feel the hoe, nor the vine the pruning hook. The strong plowman, too, will free his oxen from the yoke. See the world with its weighty dome bowing, earth and wide sea and deep heavens. See how everything delights in the future age. Those of you who know Ann Denny will probably not be surprised when I tell you that she objected to that line about the snakes dying off. She was at pains once to point out to me that snakes are a necessary part of the ecosystem. But that wasn't the point. At least not Virgil's point, anyway. These words are so reminiscent of Isaiah's prophecy that, starting at least with the Emperor Constantine, which is something I found out only yesterday, as it turns out, in the early 4th century, Christians believed for more than 1,000 years that Virgil had prophesied the coming of Jesus. That's probably why Virgil is Dante's guide through hell and purgatory in the Divine Comedy. And who knows? Maybe Virgil did catch a glimpse of the coming Messianic age. In all fairness, though, it's more likely that he was writing about the unborn child which Augustus's first wife Scribonia was carrying. It turned out to be Augustus's only daughter Julia, and she ended up being so notorious that she was banished from Rome for immorality. Oops. But what both of these poems show is the very human longing for peace, especially in times of unrest or open warfare. In ancient Judah, it was international conflict with the northern kingdom of Israel, or with the Assyrians. As for the Romans, their scourge was the horrors of civil war. Caesar versus Pompey, then Mark Antony versus Octavian, who was not yet known as Augustus. Longing for peace is universal. Even if the specific situation which inspired a prophecy of peace turns out differently than we had expected, or predicted, or hoped. And it isn't just peace at the national or societal level that we yearn for. We also want inner peace. A quote often falsely attributed to Lao Tzu, the legendary Chinese philosopher who's supposed to have lived in the 6th century BCE, to have written the Tao Te Ching just before riding off into the sunset, literally, and to have founded Taoism, puts it this way: if there's to be peace in the world, there must be peace in the nations. If there's to be peace in the nations, there must be peace in the cities. If there's to be peace in the cities, there must be peace between neighbors. If there's to be peace between neighbors, there must be peace in the home. If there's to be peace in the home, there must be peace in the heart. Or in the words of the 1977 TV miniseries Jesus of Nazareth, men must change before kingdoms can. Last week I mentioned Joseph Yu, that's Y-O-O, for those of you taking notes, a Korean-born Episcopal priest who lives and ministers in Texas. In one of his short videos from about 3 months ago, he tells a story which illustrates the point that we must change the way we look at each other before we can see this new day of peace. I first heard this story from my wife when she used it in one of her sermons long ago. It's a story told by the rabbis. A teacher once asked his students, "How do you know when the night has ended and the day has begun?" And one student raised his hand. "Is it when you can tell the difference between a dog and a sheep in the dim light?" And another asked, "Is it when you can distinguish a fig tree from a grapevine?" But the rabbi shook his head no. "You know the night has ended and the day has begun when you can look into the face of another person, any person, whether a stranger or enemy, and can recognize them as your brother or sister. Until then, no matter what time the clock says, it is still night." Rabbi Annie Tucker of Temple Israel Center in White Plains, New York, puts it this way: "It is only when we look at someone we do not know and see them as a fellow child of God, a person worthy of inherent dignity and respect, that we can overcome the darkness that so often plagues modern society. Until we feel a sense of responsibility for the stranger, a sense of connection to the other, night, indeed, is still very much upon us." But let's end on a more positive note, so to speak. A beloved Christmas song from the 1840s. It was a bit slow to gain the acceptance it now enjoys, yet I think you'll agree that it's a possibly recognizable tune. So let's take to heart both its message of a new dawn and its proclamation that Christ's gospel is peace. O holy night, the stars are brightly shining. It is the night of our dear Savior's birth. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. A thrill of hope, the weary world rejoices, for yonder breaks a new and glorious morn. Fall on your knees, oh, hear the angel voices, O night divine, O night when Christ was born, O night divine, O night divine. Truly he taught us to love one another. His law is love, and his gospel is peace. Chains shall he break, for the slave is our brother, and in his name all oppression shall cease. Sweet hymns of joy in grateful chorus raise we, let all within us praise his holy name. Christ is the Lord. Oh, praise his name forever. His power and glory evermore proclaim. His